When I turned 68, people started speaking to me in that soft, careful voice. Like grief was a fragile glass they didn't want to drop. They'd touch my elbow at church, press a warm hand to my shoulder in the grocery store aisle, and say the same sentence with a little shake of the head. "Your poor daddy. What a terrible accident." Accident. That word followed me around for years like a bad smell clinging to winter coats. It sat in the corners of my home. It waited for me at night when the house got quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum and the clock's slow ticking. Tick, 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 like time itself was reminding me what we'd all agreed not to look at too closely. Because the truth is, I didn't believe it was an accident. Not the way they said it. Not the way the police said it, with their clipped voices and their practiced sympathy. Drunk driver. No witnesses. Case closed. And I'll tell you something else I didn't say out loud for a long time. I didn't just lose my father that day. I lost the version of my family that I'd been trying to protect since I was a girl. If you're watching this from somewhere quiet, your bedroom, your car, the break room at work, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Sometimes it helps, just knowing we're not alone in our corners of the world. And if you've ever had a feeling in your gut that someone was lying to your face, go ahead and type "I knew" in the comments. Because that's what this story is really about. The knowing. It started with something small enough to fit between two fingers. A receipt. It was thin and pale, the kind of paper that curls at the edges after a few days, like it's trying to disappear. I found it tucked behind my father's old driver's license in his wallet, the same cracked leather wallet he'd carried for years. I was sitting on the floor of his bedroom, surrounded by the quiet debris of a life. His folded shirts that still held the faint scent of soap and aftershave, his watch in the top drawer, the tiny tin where he kept spare keys. Outside, the trees were doing that late summer thing. Leaves moving lazily, sunlight slanting in through the blinds. The house smelled like dust and lemon polish. My knees hurt from kneeling on the carpet, but I kept going through everything anyway, because grief has a way of making you think you can sort the world back into order if you just put enough things into neat piles. His wallet was heavier than I expected. Men's wallets always are, like they've got whole histories pressed inside them. And there it was. A coffee receipt. Cash paid. Same little cafe my father stopped at every morning, like a ritual. The date at the top was right. The location was right. But the time printed on it, clean, unforgiving numbers, made my throat go tight. It was stamped 2 hours after they told me he died. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. I blinked hard and looked again. The numbers didn't move. 2 hours after. I remember how my fingers started to shake, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but a small tremor that started at the tips and ran up my hands like a warning. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in that empty room. A receipt can't lie, can it? But people can. My father's name was Harold to most people, but to me he was Daddy. Steady hands, careful words, a man who always checked the locks twice before bed. When I was young, he'd wake up early and make coffee so strong it could raise the dead, and the whole house would smell like roasted beans before the sun had fully climbed. He wasn't a man who made careless mistakes. He wasn't a man who wandered into danger without seeing it. And he wasn't the kind of man who left loose ends. That's why that little piece of paper felt like a rope someone had dropped at my feet. I stood up too fast, got dizzy, and had to put my palm against the dresser. I stared at the receipt again, like it would soften if I looked at it long enough. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not my husband. Not my children. Not even my closest friend, Lorraine, who'd brought casseroles and sat with me after the funeral and held my hand in the worst parts of the night. Because I already knew what they'd say. It's probably nothing. You're grieving. Don't do this to yourself. People say those things like they're being kind, but sometimes kindness is just a pillow pressed too firmly over the mouth of truth. I slid the receipt into my blouse pocket, right over my heart, and it felt like it belonged there. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face in my mind. His gentle frown when he was thinking, his hands wrapped around a warm mug, his voice telling me to always trust what I feel. The next morning, I drove to the cafe. It was one of those old places downtown with fogged windows and chipped blue paint around the doorframe. The bell above the entrance gave a tired little jingle when you walked in. Inside, the air was thick with coffee and butter and something sweet. Cinnamon, maybe. The kind of smell that used to make me feel safe. But that day, it made my stomach twist. The floor was black and white tile worn smooth in the center, like years of footsteps had polished it. The counter display had muffins and pastries lined up like they were posing. A couple of regulars sat in the same booths they probably sat in every day, reading newspapers, pretending not to notice anybody. I went to the counter and waited until a young cashier looked up at me. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she had that tired look in her eyes that told me she'd been standing too long. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I pulled the receipt from my pocket, unfolded it carefully like it was sacred. "I'm sorry," I said, and even my own voice sounded strange to me. This is from 2 days ago. I found it in my father's wallet." Her eyes flicked down. Her expression changed just a little. Not guilt, not fear, but recognition. "Harold," she said quietly, like his name had weight. My throat tightened. "You knew him?" She nodded, her lips pressing together. "He came in every morning. Always said, 'Good morning,' like he meant it." The kindness in that small detail, like he meant it, hit me harder than I expected. It made my eyes sting. "Do you remember him that day?" I asked. The day he died." She hesitated, and I watched her glance toward the back, like she was checking if someone could hear. Then she leaned forward a little. "Yes," she said. "I remember because he was different. Different." That word was a door cracking open. "How?" I whispered. "He was calm," she said. "Not his usual chatty calm. More like waiting. Like he'd already decided something. He didn't read the paper. Didn't joke. He just sat at the corner table." She pointed to the table by the window, the one that let you see the street. The one where my father liked to sit because he liked to watch people go by. Because he liked to pretend the world was still simple. "He asked me what time it was," she continued. "And then he just waited." My heart thumped hard. Was he alone? She paused again. "Not the whole time." The cafe suddenly felt too warm. I could hear the espresso machine hissing, the clink of a spoon, someone laughing too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. All of it felt far away, like I was underwater. "Who came?" I asked. She looked at me with something that almost looked like pity. "A man. Older. Same age-ish." He sat across from him. I swallowed. "Did you recognize him?" She shook her head. "No. But I remember his hands. He had a ring. Big gold ring. And he kept tapping the table with one finger. Like he was impatient. My uncle wore a big gold ring. I knew it the second she said it. I knew it in my bones. The same way you know when thunder is coming before the sky even changes. My father's brother, Ray. Ray, who'd always been loud at family dinners, always talking about money and what things are worth. Ray, who used to slap my father on the back too hard and call him old man. Like affection was something you had to disguise as roughness. Ray, who'd stood at the funeral with dry eyes and a stiff jaw, telling everyone the police said it was an accident, telling me there was no point digging around because it would only cause trouble. Ray, who'd insisted on handling the paperwork for Daddy's property because you've got enough on your plate, honey. Ray, who'd said, let it go. I felt my mouth go dry. Do you have security cameras? I asked, and I could hear the tremble in my own voice now, no matter how hard I tried to smooth it. The cashier's eyes widened. She didn't want to answer that. I could see it plain as day. I think so, she said. The owner, Mr. Patel, he handles that. Can I talk to him? She bit her lip. He's in the back. And right then, I want you to pause with me for a second, because this is where a lot of people would have turned around. They would have told themselves it was too much, that they didn't want to know. If you've ever been at that edge, where truth is right there, but stepping toward it means your whole life might change, tell me in the comments, would you have kept going? Would you have asked for the footage? Or would you have taken the receipt home and tried to forget it? Because I didn't forget. I waited. Mr. Patel came out wiping his hands on a towel. He had kind eyes and a calm face, the kind of man who probably heard a lot of people's stories over coffee and never judged them. I told him who I was. I told him my father's name. I showed him the receipt. He listened quietly. And when I got to the part about the timestamp, his eyebrows pulled together. That doesn't make sense, he said softly. No, I agreed. It doesn't. He glanced toward the corner table, then back at me. You said, police told you he died earlier. Yes. Mr. Patel exhaled slowly. I can't just, he began, and then he stopped. He looked at my face like he could see the desperation sitting behind my eyes. Finally, he nodded once. Come, he said. He led me behind the counter, through a door that smelled like dish soap and hot metal, into a small office with stacked boxes and a computer on a cluttered desk. The air back there was cooler, and the fluorescent lights made everything look too sharp. He moved the mouse, clicked through folders, typed something in. I stood behind him, my hands clasped so tight my fingers ached. And then the screen filled with grainy video. There was my father, sitting at the corner table. Even through the blurry footage, I recognized the way he held his cup, both hands around it like he was warming his palms. I recognized his posture. Upright, patient. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might not be able to breathe. Then, a man entered the frame. He walked in with purpose, like he owned the room. He sat across from my father. And even though the camera didn't catch his face clearly at first, I knew him. The big gold ring. The way he leaned forward. Uncle Ray. I felt a coldness move through me, slow and steady, like a winter draft creeping under a door. Mr. Patel paused the video, looking over his shoulder at me. Do you know this man? He asked. My voice barely came out. Yes. Mr. Patel's face fell into a solemn line. I'm sorry, he said, and I don't think he meant it in the polite customer service way. I think he meant it like a human being. The video continued. My uncle and my father spoke, but there was no sound. Still, you could see the tension in the way my uncle's hand kept tapping the table, the way my father's mouth tightened as if he was holding back words. Then my father slid something across the table. A folder. My stomach dropped. Because I knew my father had paperwork. He'd been talking about getting things in order for a while. He'd been worried about the property, a small piece of land with an old house on it that had been in our family a long time. The kind of property people fight over because they think land is the same thing as love. My father looked tired in that footage. Not sick tired. Soul tired. Uncle Ray looked hungry. And right before the clip ended, my uncle reached out and covered my father's hand for a moment. Not a loving touch. Not gentle. It looked like pressure. Like control. Then the two men stood. My uncle left first. My father followed a few minutes later. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, my mind racing. Because the police report said my father died in a hit and run on his way home. But the footage showed my father alive at the cafe. After the time they claimed he died. Which meant one of two things. Either the police had the time wrong. Or someone wanted the time wrong. Mr. Patel printed still images for me. My father sitting, my uncle entering, the folder on the table. My hands shook as I took them. The paper felt heavier than it should have. When I walked back out into the cafe, the bell jingled again. The world looked the same. People sipped coffee. A woman laughed. Someone opened a newspaper. And I realized something that turned my stomach. Life keeps going, even when the truth is screaming under the surface. That afternoon, I drove home with the images on the passenger seat like they were a living thing. The sun was bright, but I felt cold. My thoughts kept circling the same question. What did Daddy sign? And why was Uncle Ray there? At home, my husband asked if I was okay. I told him I was tired. I lied, because sometimes truth is too large to hand someone in one piece. I waited until the house was quiet again, until the day had softened into evening. Then I pulled out the file Uncle Ray had insisted on handling. The property paperwork. It was in my father's study, in a drawer that still smelled faintly of his tobacco and old books. The folder was neat, labeled in my uncle's sharp handwriting. And inside it, I found the signature. My father's signature. On a transfer. Dated the same day he died. Signed away to Uncle Ray. My hands went numb. I stared at that looping familiar signature, Harold's careful cursive, and it felt like looking at a ghost. Because my father had always told me that land wasn't just land. This is where your mama planted roses, he'd say. This is where you learned to ride your bike. This is where we buried the dog you cried over for a week. This land holds us. And now it was in my uncle's name. My chest hurt. I sat down hard in my father's chair, and it creaked under me the way it always used to under him. For a second, it felt like he was still there, like if I turned my head I'd see him with his sleeves rolled up and his reading glasses low on his nose. But there was only silence. That night, I called Lorraine. "Lorraine," I said as soon as she answered, "I need you to listen to me." She heard the edge in my voice and got quiet. "What is it?" she asked. "I think my father didn't die the way they said," I whispered. There was a long pause. Then her voice came, gentle but steady. "Tell me everything." And I did. And as I spoke, I realized my mouth tasted bitter, like coffee gone cold. Like truth you don't want but can't spit out. Lorraine didn't interrupt. When I finished, she exhaled softly. "Oh, honey," she said. "That man." She didn't even have to say my uncle's name. I stared out the window into the dark yard where my father used to stand and smoke, his silhouette calm against the porch light. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. Lorraine's voice got firmer. "Yes, you do. And right there I want to ask you something, because this is the moment where the story splits into two kinds of people. Some people protect peace, even if it's built on a lie. And some people protect truth, even if it burns their whole life down. Which one are you?" In the next part, I'm going to tell you what I did next. How I went back to the police, How my uncle's kindness turned sharp the moment he realized I wasn't going to let it go, and how one quiet woman with a receipt in her pocket ended up facing the ugliest side of family. I didn't go back to the police right away. That might sound strange, but when you've lived most of your life keeping peace in a family that survives on silence, you don't rush toward confrontation. You circle it. You test the ground. You listen more closely to what isn't being said. For 2 days, I carried those printed images in my handbag, folded inside an old envelope like contraband. Every time my fingers brushed against them, my stomach tightened. At night, I dreamed of my father sitting at that cafe table, looking up as if he were about to say something important, but I'd wake before I could hear it. On the third morning, Uncle Ray called. His name flashed on my phone, and I remember thinking how odd it was that my hands felt steady when I answered. Calm can come from fear, but it can also come from clarity. "Morning, kid," he said, too cheerful. "Just checking in. You holding up okay?" There it was again. That voice. Like he was already practicing what to say if anyone asked later. "I'm managing," I said. "I went through Daddy's things." A pause. Barely a second. But I heard it. "Oh," he replied. "Anything you need help with?" "Yes," I said, and my heart began to thud harder. "I found a receipt." Silence stretched this time. I could almost picture him standing still, that gold ring catching the light as his hand tightened around the phone. "A receipt," he repeated carefully. "For what?" "Coffee," I said. "At the cafe downtown." Another pause. This one longer. "That place he always went?" Ray asked. "Yes." "Well," he chuckled softly, "you know your daddy. Probably stuffed an old one in his wallet." He wasn't exactly organized. I closed my eyes. My father was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. "The receipt is dated 2 hours after the police say he died," I said quietly. The line went dead silent. Then Ray laughed. It was quick, sharp, and wrong. "Now, come on," he said. "You're reading too much into this. Grief messes with your head." That sentence landed heavy, because it was the same one the officer had used. "I went to the cafe," I continued. "They remember him. They remember you." Another silence. This one thick. "You had no right," Ray said, and the warmth in his voice vanished like a light switched off. "I have every right," I replied, surprised at how steady I sounded. "He was my father." "You're chasing ghosts," he snapped. "You think you're helping, but you're just stirring up trouble." Trouble. That word had always belonged to women in my family, the ones who asked questions, the ones who didn't smile through discomfort. "I saw the footage, Ray," I said. The air between us felt electric. "You're wrong," he said quickly. "You don't understand what you saw." "I saw you sitting across from him," I said. "I saw the folder." His breathing changed. "Faster now." "That doesn't prove anything." "It proves he was alive," I said. "After the time you told everyone he died." There it was. The crack. "You're going to ruin this family," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that what you want? Your kids knowing their uncle's a criminal? Your father's name dragged through courtrooms?" I thought of my father's hands. Steady. Honest. I thought of the way he taught me to tie my shoes, patiently, over and over, never raising his voice. "I want the truth," I said. Ray exhaled slowly. "You don't know what you're messing with." The call ended shortly after that. He didn't say goodbye. I sat there for a long time, the phone warm in my hand. Outside, A lawnmower droned somewhere down the street. Life, as always, went on. If someone in your life ever tried to scare you into silence, tell me in the comments. Just one word: pressure. Sometimes naming it takes away some of its power. That afternoon, I went to the police station. The same building. The same beige walls. The same stale smell of old coffee and paper. The officer at the desk recognized me immediately, and his shoulders stiffened. "Mrs. Callahan," he said. "What can we do for you?" "I need to reopen my father's case," I said. He sighed. "We've been through this." I placed the envelope on the counter and slid out the images. The cafe footage. The timestamps. He leaned forward despite himself. "That receipt," I added, placing it beside the photos. "Printed 2 hours after his reported time of death." The officer's jaw tightened. He glanced around, then gathered the papers and gestured for me to follow him. We sat in a small room with a metal table and plastic chairs. Another officer joined us, older, quieter. He studied the evidence carefully, his eyes narrowing. "This needs to be reviewed," he said finally. "There may have been errors." Errors. That word felt like another attempt to soften something sharp. Within a week, the case was reopened. That's when things changed. Family members stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. My cousin crossed the street when she saw me coming. At church, people smiled tightly, like they were afraid association might stain them. And Ray showed up at my house. It was evening. The sky was bruised purple, the air heavy. I was washing dishes when I heard the knock. Hard. Insistent. I dried my hands slowly. When I opened the door, he stood there with his jacket unbuttoned, his jaw clenched. "You happy now?" he asked. "I didn't do this," I said. "Your choices did." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your father knew what he was doing. He signed willingly." "After you threatened him?" I asked. His eyes flickered. "You don't know that." "I know my father," I said. Ray laughed bitterly. "He was weak." That word sliced through me. "He was kind," I said. "And you used that." Ray's shoulders slumped just a little then. For a moment, I saw something human in him. Fear, maybe. Desperation. "I was drowning," he said quietly. "Debt. Loans. I thought if I could just get the property." "And when he hesitated?" I asked. Ray's jaw tightened again. "He said he needed time." "And you didn't give him any," I said. He didn't answer. That was the closest he ever came to a confession. The investigation moved faster after that. Phone records. Financials. A witness who'd seen an argument near the road where my father was struck. It turned out it wasn't a hit and run at all. My father had been walking home when Ray followed him in his truck. Words were exchanged. Tempers flared. And in a moment of panic and rage, Ray pressed the accelerator. Not drunk. Not accidental. Intentional. The trial took months. Sitting in that courtroom, I felt older than my years and younger than my fear. Ray sat across from me, staring like I'd betrayed him. But the truth is, he betrayed us first. When the verdict came back guilty, the room went quiet. No gasps. No drama. Just the sound of a family finally breaking apart. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened after. The cost of choosing truth, the loneliness that followed, and how I learned to live with both justice and loss. The day after the verdict, I woke up before dawn. The house was still and grey, That hour when night hasn't quite let go and morning hasn't found its voice yet. I lay there listening to my husband's slow breathing beside me, the familiar rhythm of it grounding me, and for the first time since my father died, my chest didn't feel tight with urgency. It felt heavy instead. Justice, I learned, doesn't arrive with relief the way people expect. It arrives quietly, like a door closing somewhere in the distance. You hear it, you know it's final, but you're left standing in the hallway with everything that didn't come with you. At breakfast, I burned the toast. The smell filled the kitchen, sharp and bitter. I scraped it into the trash and stared out the window while the kettle screamed itself hoarse. My hands shook just enough to remind me that this was real, that it was done. My children called later that morning. They'd been careful through the trial, asking how I was but not pushing. They're grown now, with lives of their own, and part of me was grateful they hadn't been pulled too deeply into the mess of it all. "Mom," my daughter said, her voice soft, "how are you holding up?" I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked steadily, indifferent to everything we'd been through. "I'm breathing," I said. "That's about all I can promise today." She laughed gently, and I could hear the relief in it. "That's enough." After I hung up, I walked into my father's study. I hadn't gone in there since the verdict. The room still smelled like him. Paper, dust, a trace of the menthol mints he used to keep in his pocket. Sunlight fell across the desk where he used to sit, and for a moment I imagined him there again, pen in hand, brow furrowed as he worked through some small problem. I sat in his chair. It creaked under my weight, and the sound made my throat tighten. I rested my hands on the desk and let myself feel it, everything I'd been holding back. The grief didn't come all at once. It came in waves. Sharp, then dull. Like breathing through pain. I thought about how many years I'd spent keeping peace in my family. Swallowing words. Smoothing rough edges. Teaching myself that silence was the same thing as love. And I realized how wrong I'd been. If you've ever been the one who kept the family together, always fixing, always forgiving, tell me in the comments. Just write me. I want you to know I see you. The weeks after the trial were lonely. People didn't know what to say to me anymore. Some avoided me entirely, like truth was contagious. Others spoke in hushed tones, asking if I regretted it, if it had been worth it. Worth it. How do you measure that? Was it worth losing half my family? Worth the empty chairs at holidays? Worth the way my cousin's eyes slid away when we passed in the grocery store? Some nights, I wondered if I'd chosen too much truth. But then I'd think of my father, walking home that day, believing he was settling a family matter, believing he was safe. And I knew I would do it again. One afternoon, months later, I visited the cafe. The bell jingled softly when I walked in, and the smell of coffee wrapped around me like a memory. The same cashier was there. She recognized me immediately and smiled, a little sad. "I'm glad you came back," she said. "So am I replied. I sat at the corner table, my father's table, and ordered a coffee. When it came, I wrapped both hands around the mug the way he used to. It was hot, grounding. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing the past. I felt like I was sitting with it. I thought about Ray. About how easy it would be to paint him as a monster. But the truth was more uncomfortable than that. He was a man who made a terrible choice because he believed money mattered more than people. A man who convinced himself he was entitled to something that didn't belong to him. That doesn't excuse what he did. But understanding it helped me let go of some of the anger. Forgiveness didn't come all at once. It still doesn't, some days. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't about freeing someone else. It's about deciding how much space they get to occupy inside you. As the years passed, the sharp edges softened. I started gardening again. I planted roses on the property my father loved. Deep red ones, like the kind my mother used to tend. My hands in the dirt felt like prayer, like connection. Sometimes, neighbors would stop by and ask about the land, about my father. I'd tell them stories. Small ones. Human ones. The way he whistled when he fixed things. The way he never forgot a birthday. I kept him alive that way. Now, at 72, I understand something I didn't when I was younger. Silence isn't peace. It's just quiet injustice waiting for someone brave enough to break it. I don't regret telling the truth. I regret how long it took me to trust myself enough to say it out loud. If my younger self were sitting across from me right now, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes full of doubt, I'd tell her this. Listen to that feeling in your chest. The one that won't go away. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to protect you. And before I end this part, I want to ask you, because your answers matter more than you know. Have you ever stayed silent to protect your family, and later wished you hadn't? Tell me in the comments. Your story might help someone else find their voice. At this age, mornings come slower. I sit by the window with my coffee and watch the light move across the floor, the way my father used to. Some days, the past feels far away, like a story I once heard. Other days, it sits beside me, quiet and familiar, like an old friend who doesn't need words. What I've learned, what took me nearly a lifetime to understand, is that truth has a cost, but silence costs more. Silence takes pieces of you slowly, so quietly you don't even notice they're gone until one day you wake up and feel smaller than you used to be. I didn't become brave overnight. I was afraid. Afraid of losing family. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of standing alone. But courage, I've learned, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it's just a woman holding a small receipt in her hand and deciding not to throw it away. I still miss my father. I always will. But I no longer carry the weight of unanswered questions. When I visit his grave now, I don't apologize for failing him. I tell him thank you for teaching me, even in death, how to stand up straight. If you're watching this and carrying a truth you've buried for the sake of peace, I want you to know something. Your voice matters. Your knowing matters. And it's never too late to listen to yourself. If this story touched you, let me know where you're watching from, or write the name of someone you wish you'd spoken up for. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are many more truths waiting to be spoken. So I'll leave you with this, from one woman looking back on a long life to another soul somewhere out there listening quietly. If you were me, would you have chosen silence, or would you have chosen the truth?